Greetings, weary time traveler. Tonight, you're no battle-scarred soldier chasing glory, no starving peasant clawing through garbage, not even a plague-ridden rat catcher dying meaningfully. No, tonight you transform into something far more refined and infinitely more damned. You're a Georgian gentleman, a being of perfumed wigs, imported wines, and perpetual bowel obstructions. You inhabit a universe of polite deceptions and silent IOUs, where a coat's tailoring matters infinitely more than its wearer's soul. Here, truth only escapes drunken lips, mercifully a frequent occurrence. You're admired, envied, buffed to a high shine like the family silver. And like that silver, you're handled with gloves, never warmth. Before we commence this elegant misery, indulge me. Whisper where you're listening from and what hour your pocket watch shows. I relish learning which shadowed corners of the globe are tuning into this slow-motion historical car crash. Should you crave early access to more exquisitely horrifying bedtime stories, ad-free episode audio, or simply wish to toss coins to your struggling chronicler, the Patreon link lurks below like a well-bred panhandler. But for now, recline your powdered wig against the headrest. Let us begin. Your existence commences not with peace, but performance. You debut in the east wing of a country house older than common sense, in a chamber where heavy drapes protect the wood paneling from childbirth screams, those two muffled by Persian carpets. Your mother bleeds. The midwife's soused. The footman's fainted. Meanwhile, some nameless nurse dangles your slippery, squalling form at arm's length, squinting not at your face, but your earlobes, searching for your father's distinct lobe pattern or grandfather's or someone's, because bloodlines matter more than breathing. They swaddle you in heirloom lace and existential dread before depositing you in a cradle carved by a craftsman who's been dead since Queen Anne's reign. No one inquires after your well-being. They ask if the infant seems sturdy, if its skull displays proper symmetry, if the estate's now secure from cousins wielding claims and Roman numerals. Your mother gets wheeled away, pale as her linen sheets. She'll never be asked about this again. Her duty's done. Now begins yours. Your name selected before your eyelids unstick, inherited from your great-uncle who pickled himself to death in a library chair, and your grandfather who owned half of Kent and exactly 3 acceptable emotions. You'll bear their titles, their debts, even their skin blemishes. They christen you beneath a chandelier nobody knows how to clean, using holy water that reeks suspiciously of brandy. The priest mumbles blessings. Guests murmur approval. Someone behind you starts taking bets on your life expectancy. Most lose badly. For your first earthly weeks, you're not cuddled, you're inspected. Fed, yes. Changed, eventually. Burped, if the nurse remembers. But affection? That's not part of the regimen. It breeds softness, invites sentiment, and sentiment, as any proper Georgian knows, ruins gentlemen faster than French philosophy. Instead, you endure early character tests, colic, cradle calf, a governess who sneezes like a startled horse, and another who believes infants benefit from interrogation bright lighting. You fail them all spectacularly. By 6 months old, your mother's been repainted and paraded at dinners. Your father's resumed pretending you're the product of divine intervention rather than regrettable passion. The household settled into routines that include you the way one might include a particularly temperamental potted plant. You're fussed over in public, whispered about in private, and utterly invisible when it counts. Seen constantly, but never truly observed. The wet nurse, a woman whose name you'll never learn, becomes your sole tether to the living world. She smells of onions, vinegar, and something suspiciously like despair. Sings painfully off-key. Her hands feel like sandpaper. Her eyes don't sparkle when meeting yours, but at least they meet them. That alone makes her more present than anyone else. When she vanishes one morning, dismissed for reasons nobody explains, you weep for precisely 1 hour. Then her replacement arrives, and your tears stop permanently. Permanence isn't something you're taught to expect. Your early toys aren't toys at all, they're heirlooms. You're given an ivory inlaid rattle, then scolded for nearly dropping it. A silver spoon bearing your initials, though you're forbidden from touching the handle. A stuffed bear with onyx eyes that smells equal parts cedar and grave dirt. Every object you own is a symbol, never a comfort. Your first lesson in property rights? Nothing belonging to you is actually yours. Illness visits often, lingering just long enough to remind you that wealth can't purchase health, only nicer blankets during fevers. When your temperature spikes, the physician arrives reeking of pipe smoke and professional failure. After peering down your throat, he declares your humor's imbalanced and prescribes goat's milk boiled with rosemary. You promptly vomit it onto the governess's shoes. She records this incident in the household log under defiance. You're 9 months old. Walking's demanded before you're ready. Talking's discouraged unless you're quoting scripture or dead poets. When you tumble, a maid picks you up. When you cry, she gets reprimanded for coddling you. Eventually, she stops helping you up at all. You learn to weep silently, a skill praised as maturity. Your first birthday features cake you can't eat, guests you don't know, and a wax effigy of yourself placed center table, an artistic commission meant to impress visiting relatives. You observe your own likeness from a high chair while adults sip punch and admire how cleverly the cheeks have been rendered. Nobody looks at your actual cheeks, which are chapped raw. Speech comes slowly, not from dullness, but from dawning understanding that being heard earns no rewards. Your first word, cold, gets misheard as coal, so the nurse spends a week obsessively restocking fireplaces. You try again with hungry. This gets dismissed as standard infant complaining rather than an actual need. Eventually, you simply speak less. The staff rotates constantly. Nannies lose patience. Tutors find better positions. Nurses get dismissed for reasons oscillating between whispered scandals and conflicting digestive philosophies. You remain the small, wide-eyed constant, watching everyone around you change while you stay exactly, eternally in place. In theory, you're the household sun. In practice, you're its moon, important but distant, like a cursed comet nobody wants orbiting too close. At 2 years old, they introduce you to sitting still, not as a request, but a divine expectation. They strap you into stiff clothing, position you before the family's second-rate portrait artist, the talented one's busy painting a cousin with better prospects, and command motionless obedience while he sketches your proportions. When you sneeze halfway through, the canvas gets discarded. You're scolded for weak constitution and sent to bed without jam. Discipline begins early here, not the loud kind. Gentlemen's sons aren't struck where it leaves marks, but the slow, cold variety. Revoked privileges, withheld praise, your father's silent stare that somehow accuses you of disappointing 8 generations of ancestors simply by crying over shoes. You learn quickly. Suffering happens silently, preferably behind locked nursery doors. They dress you in miniature adult costumes, breeches with unmanageable buttons, waistcoats embroidered too finely for clumsy fingers. Your hair gets combed until your scalp burns. Your face scrubbed with vinegar water for that coveted, healthy glow. The nurse claims you look cherubic. The cook mutters you resemble a taxidermied rat in Sunday best. You form no opinions. Nobody's ever asked for them. By 3, you've memorized which footsteps mean comfort and which mean correction. You know your mother smells of lavender and emotional distance. That your father's laughter dies the instant you enter rooms. That drawing rooms aren't for children unless guests demand an appearance, at which point you're paraded in like a prize hound, ordered to recite something clever, then vanish before breathing too audibly. You perform this perfectly, too perfectly. And the servants know your rhythms better than your parents ever will. They recognize which cries mean hunger versus terror. They know you despise powdered wigs tickle, but love stable-yard sounds outside your window. They know when you're faking coughs to skip chapel versus genuinely ill. They know because they must, but they don't love you for it. Their resentment simmers quietly, not entirely unjustified. You don't recall childhood's exact end. It doesn't arrive with fanfare, just fresh garments and hushed conversations from which you're excluded. Nobody explains what's coming, only that it's time. Time to become something respectable, something proper, something you're not ready for. Boarding school. You're 7 now. Your curls get sheared off. your posture forcibly straightened, and your tears declared unwelcome. The night before departure, your mother dabs your face with a scented handkerchief and tells you to be brave, which really means don't embarrass me. Your father offers no words, just a leather-bound Cicero text that smells of disinterest. No discussions occur. Your trunk's already packed, your name stitched into collars by unseen hands. Your destination immovable. St. Alderwine's College for the Manufacturing of Young Gentlemen. You're not being sent to learn. You're being sent to harden. The carriage ride stretches interminable, silent except for wheel rattles and your tutor's periodic throat clearings. The old man smells of boiled wool and profound indifference. When you ask travel duration, he ignores you. You try again, softer. He gazes out the window. Conversation, you're realizing, is an adult privilege and a boy's punishment for attempting it. You pass hedgerows stiff with frost, ponds frozen mid-ripple, villages with chimney smoke curling like question marks, all blurring into gray streaks as the sun bleeds away. When you arrive, the sky's the color of tarnished silver, your stomach folding in on itself like bad origami. The building resembles a prison that made half-hearted attempts at ivy camouflage. No welcoming lamps glow in windows. No friendly hands extend greetings. Just a single bell tolling deep and ominous as a death knell. A porter smelling of pipe ash and shoe polish takes your trunk wordlessly. You're led down corridors reeking of mildew and punishment, past headmasters' portraits where every subject appears to have died mid-sneer. A boy your age shoulder checks you without apology or eye contact, already walking with the hunched posture of someone expecting blows. You meet the housemaster, a man with denture-perfect teeth and a cane he carries like an extension of his hand. He explains that boys speaking out of turn get silenced. That idleness is wickedness. That St. Alderwine's has no tolerance for weakness. He delivers this speech while poking a fire with one hand and assessing your height with the other. Being taller than average gets noted with a nod that isn't praise. Your punishments will scale accordingly. The dormitory smells of unwashed feet and damp wool. 6 beds, 1 stove, 2 windows that never fully close. Floorboards creak warnings underfoot. Blankets feel like burlap. Someone's carved a crude skull into your bedpost. Your roommates don't introduce themselves. They glance at your shoes, deem them acceptable, and return to eating gray porridge from dented bowls. When you ask about washroom location, one boy points vaguely downward. Another mutters, "You'll learn." The closest thing to welcome you'll receive. Mornings start before dawn via bell clang that could wake graveyards. You dress in darkness, shuffle in stiff shoes toward chapel, where beneath flaking mildew ceilings, you recite prayers nobody explains while the headmaster gazes middle distance like God personally disappointed him. Breakfast features lukewarm porridge, crust-dominant bread, and milk perpetually one sigh from souring. Complaints get noted. Notes become punishments. Kitchen staff watch boys eat like anthropologists studying future tyrants. Lessons commence with Latin, then Greek, then arithmetic. Less about numbers than watching classmates get caned for hesitating during times tables. Your tutor teaches with the enthusiasm of a man who once dreamed of greatness and now dreams only of silence. When you err, he doesn't shout, just pauses, inhales, and raises the cane. The anticipation hurts worse than the strike. After 3 strikes, you stop flinching. This gets interpreted as progress. Handwriting lessons involve goose quills that cramp fingers over ink blots. Your knuckles crack from cold. Ink stains cuffs, sleeves, sometimes your face. Nobody explains stain removal. When you smudge Latin verses, the page gets torn up for rewriting. Your hands shake. This too gets noted. At night, you soak fingers in cold water and pretend the sting signifies improvement. The yard's a frozen mud patch where play means stone-filled rags thrown at each other while older boys trip younger ones. You learn quickly, stay upright, stay silent. Limping back gets you laughed at. Complaining to masters gets you beaten twice, once by authority, once by peers for breaking silence codes. There's no justice here, only tradition. Punishments vary. Missed lessons mean candlelit lines until vision blurs. Forgotten prayers mean stone floor kneeling until knees feel nail-studded. Backtalk earns the cane. Silence earns suspicion. You once hear a boy scream behind the storeroom door. Nobody reacts. Next morning, he returns black-eyed, grinning unnaturally wide. He's promoted to chapel reader within the week. Meals aren't for nourishment, but order. You sit silent, fork right, knife left, eyes on table. Chew when permitted. Swallow soundlessly. When a boy coughs too loud, the headmaster pauses, frowns, has him removed. He returns 3 days later. Thinner, quieter, one hand bandaged. Rumor says he spilled gravy on a prefect's coat. Nobody asks for truth. Truth here bends. Rules don't. Nights in the dormitory hum with whispers and bruises. Boys cry into pillows and pretend they don't. Sometimes they speak in code about home, sisters, warm bread, real soap. Sometimes they mention running, never allowed. That would require hope. And hope's scarcer here than clean linens. You stay awake past curfew, heart racing at shadows, stomach gnawing itself. The stove gives up by midnight. Your feet go numb. Eventually, you sleep face down on a pillow that smells like someone else's fear. Home letters get dictated. You're told what to write. That you're thriving, that masters are kind, that you're grateful. You pen these lies with stiff fingers and a jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Your mother replies once, lavender-scented stationery, saying she's pleased to hear of your moral formation. Your father doesn't write. Instead, he sends on the sublimity of discipline by a man who once flogged a child to death and got buried with honors. You reread the dedication twice. It's addressed to the young men of England. You swallow bile. You grow harder, not stronger, just less breakable. Shoulders stay rigid even when aching. Hands blister then callous. You master cheek biting when insulted, smiling without warmth. You never cry where seen. When you pray, it's not for rescue, just endurance. The God they teach doesn't comfort. He instructs. Time moves strangely at St. Alderwine's. Days drag like punishments. Years vanish when blinked away. One moment you're getting caned for botched declensions. The next your voice has dropped. Chin needs shaving. And your bed's been given to someone smaller. You haven't completed education, just outgrown its most physically violent phase. The masters declare you sufficiently disciplined, code for ready for refinement elsewhere. So with calloused hands and a spine trained to bend without breaking, you're sent home, not to rest, but to polish. Because now that beatings have served their purpose, the next act begins. Cravat tying, elocution, fencing masters who care more about posture than survival, drawing room rehearsals where you learn to smile without showing teeth. You've survived canes and cold porridge. Now you'll learn to suffer in silk. You're an adolescent now, groomed, polished, and trained. Not raised, not nurtured. Those words imply flexibility. You're being molded like silver plate hammered into something valuable. The moment your voice cracks, expectations triple. You're no longer a boy, but not yet a man, meaning everyone scrambles to ensure you don't grow up wrong. Wrong, of course, meaning anything outside Georgian gentleman specifications. They instruct you in every art except being human. As your body changes, so does your wardrobe. No more breeches allowing room to run. Now you're squeezed into embroidered waistcoats that restrict breathing and coats with buttons placed for fashion, not function. Each new garment feels designed to punish movement. Your neck gets stuffed into cravats starched to architectural rigidity. Stockings itch when dry, chafe when wet. You permanently smell like bay rum, sweat, and something sour nobody acknowledges. These are respectability's fragrances, the scent of becoming someone others envy, but nobody truly wants to be. Fencing lessons teach defense not for victory, but display. A proper duel, your instructor says, is about posture, not outcome. The Frenchman smells of cloves and disdain, adjusting your elbow like he fears contagion. You spend hours jabbing air while pretending not to wince when the foil bruises ribs. When you ask what happens if you lose a real duel, he sniffs. Then you lose well. Apparently, that's the more important skill. Horseback riding follows. You dislike horses. They bite. They stink. They sense fear. But fear's unacceptable, so you mount with shaking knees, forcing posture into something resembling grace. The riding master calls it adequate. which passes for high praise where compliments are currency rarely spent. You fall 3 times your first month. Each time, they claim the ground builds character. You suspect most of your character's mud by now. Flirting gets taught just as deliberately, though never labeled as such. It's woven into rhetoric lessons, posture corrections, elocution drills. You learn room entering techniques, glancing not staring methods, compliment delivery calibrated to suggest interest without eagerness. Never touch a woman's arm unless she's your wife or dying. Even then, only with gloves. The boundaries blur, but misstep consequences stay clear. You don't know how to talk to women, just how to perform talking at them, which often suffices. With servants, firm but polite. With tradesmen, polite but disinterested. With beggars, invisible. You master coded communication, nods, throat clearings, glances. I'll consider it means no. Quite so means yes. Indeed means I wasn't listening. Fascinating means I'd rather die than continue this conversation. You use them all daily, wondering if anyone means anything anymore. Dinners become posture tests. Fork left, knife right. Eyes on table and less drinking, when the wine glass becomes a temporary lifeline. Chew silently. Sip without slurping. Smile at jokes you don't understand. If someone errs, dropped silverware, misquoted Milton, ignore it gracefully, then mention it hours later so they know never to do it again. Everything's memory. Everything's quiet vengeance. Your instructors keep ledgers tracking handwriting samples, fencing scores, and a column ominously labeled disposition. Nobody explains what constitutes good disposition. You assume it means smiling insincerely and agreeing noncommittally. You excel so thoroughly, one tutor remarks. You'll go far provided nobody looks too closely. You're unsure if it's praise. Laughter gets measured. Tears don't happen. Not because feelings vanish, but because they've become unseemly. Griefs for widows. Joys for poets. You're neither. You're a young man of means, meaning your inner life must remain internal, preferably sealed behind practiced smiles and well-rehearsed anecdotes. You still feel things, of course. They just get filed away behind your left kidney alongside forgotten ambitions, and that time you fell off the damn horse. Your body constantly betrays you. Your face erupts in spots just as your valet starts using harsher powders. Your breath sours after meals. Not that anyone mentions it directly. They just offer mints more frequently. Silk stains at your armpits faster than launderers can scrub. One evening while dressing for supper, your garter snaps mid-tightening, leaving a welt across your thigh. You laugh. Your valet doesn't. He just ties the replacement tighter. You limp through dinner. Nobody notices. Or worse, they pretend not to. The other boys fare no better. You exist in shared purgatory, trained to compete for favor without acknowledging the competition. You discuss fencing scores, horse breeds, inheritance projections like they matter more than sleep or sanity. You silently rank each other. Whose cufflinks are real gold, whose fathers sit in parliament, who has sisters worth mentioning. You're cordial. You're civil. You're not friends. You can't afford to be. Romance gets discussed only in euphemisms. One boy claims to have kissed a barmaid behind stables. Another swears he received a pressed flower from some merchant's daughter. You pretend to have done both, though your closest brush with passion was an unexplained blush while helping your cousin dismount. You tell no one. You're not even sure what it meant. You just know you're not supposed to feel it. Whatever it is. Pressure mounts as your birthday approaches. Not for cake preferences, but because turning 18 marks your formal society debut. You're not emerging as yourself, but as the version they've constructed since you could hold cutlery. There will be parties, dances, introductions to girls with powerful fathers and strategically concealed ankles. You're expected to flirt, flatter, possibly propose. The thought makes your stomach twist, but you nod when mentioned. You always nod. It's what you're trained to do. One lesson nobody teaches, but you learn anyway. You're not allowed to say no. Not to your tutor, not to your tailor, not to the girl you're expected to court, not even to brandy pressed into your hand by men who want things you'll never understand. You're a gentleman, meaning you're an amalgamation of others' expectations draped in brocade. If you remove the costume, There'd be nothing underneath but silence you lack vocabulary to fill. So you smile. You bow. You raise glasses and quote Horace. You ride when told, duel when insulted, flirt when watched, stand when addressed. You've done everything asked. They're terribly proud. You're 18. You can duel, flirt, and recite Horace, but you don't know how to say no. You are, in the most unfortunate sense, a gentleman. You're free now, which is to say unsupervised and catastrophically expensive. Officially, you're a man. You've got your own rooms, your own tailor, your own calling cards, and crucially, your own accounts. This means a direct and increasingly dangerous relationship with men who've memorized your signature, but none of your excuses. The city becomes your new habitat in spirit if not on paper. A haze of candle smoke, cologne, and noise. Parties bloom nightly like rashes. Salons overflow with bored aristocrats debating books they haven't read. Card tables devour fortunes between sips of watered brandy. Horse races feel more like rituals than sport. You arrive fashionably late and leave even later because that's what men of taste do. And you are, by definition, a man of taste. Even if your boots pinch and your cuffs fray in places you pray no one notices. Your companions are other young men in similar states of overdress and underfunding. You orbit the same expensive distractions, pretending not to notice your fathers have stopped answering letters and your tailors have started asking about arrangements. Nobody says debt. That's vulgar. You discuss temporary shortfalls and unfortunate delays in disbursement. You wear poverty like expensive cologne, detectable only in certain light by those who know the scent intimately. Your rented rooms boast peeling wallpaper, but a front door painted the currently fashionable shade, which makes it practically guilt. The landlord's too polite to mention your chronically late rent. Your valet knows, of course, he's discreet. You suspect he's seen worse, possibly lived worse. He presses your shirts with almost paternal care these days, which tells you he's counted exactly how many garments you can't afford to replace. Days start around noon when hangovers dull to background noise. You eat whatever's nearest, usually bread with something pickled and regrettable, then get dressed under your valet's increasingly judgmental gaze. Afternoons alternate between clubs and horseback riding depending on weather and how recently you've lied about your riding skills. Evenings dissolve into salons, suppers, and whispered invitations that begin with candlelight and end in secrets. Somewhere between dusk and dawn, you remember you haven't written your mother in 6 months. You resolve to do it tomorrow. You won't. Women orbit you in quantities that would alarm you if examined closely. Some want your name, some want your money. Most settle for illusions of both. They flutter through salons in lace and lacquer, laughing at your jokes and pretending they haven't already memorized your prospects. You flirt back with borrowed charm, the kind perfected during long afternoons of practiced indifference. You know how to bow, how to gaze like someone's the only person in the room. You don't know how to mean it. Courtesans prove easier. They don't want promises, just payment, which feels refreshingly honest. You visit them more than advisable, usually under assumed names, and always while sufficiently drunk to forget your own. They call you darling or sir, depending on mood. You reciprocate with coin and mild affection. Sometimes you talk, not often. You're better at touching than talking, which probably says something unfortunate about your upbringing. You've never paid for conversation, just the silence afterward. Your physician, a man who smells of cloves and professional failure, warns about the French disease while draining a boil from your thigh. He insists it's nothing to fear if caught early. You nod, agree, then return to the same bed the following week. Risk is a constant companion. Regret gets scheduled for later. Gambling becomes habit, not from enjoyment, but because it's one of the few places luck might change without effort. You lose often and win occasionally, which is somehow worse. The fleeting thrill of a full purse makes subsequent losses more painful. You develop systems that don't work and revise them weekly. Each revision worsens the situation. Your valet begins suggesting which waistcoats best disguise rumpled shirts. You thank him. You both pretend it was a theoretical question. You master lying gracefully. Of course I can attend. Yes, I've read it. No, I never wager more than I can afford. These become reflexes, not statements. You forget which parts were ever true. Occasionally, you convince yourself you're in control, that this is just a phase, that you'll marry money, settle debts, and mature into a respectable man with a reputation for harmless indiscretions. That's the dream shared by a dozen other young men, all losing at cards just as spectacularly. Sometimes you spot someone who's achieved respectability, a great temple gentleman sipping wine slowly, not checking pockets when bills arrive. Polite to staff, but not familiar. Nothing to prove. You envy him briefly until realizing he was once exactly like you. Loud, overdressed, barely solvent. You suspect whatever he lost en route to dignity wasn't worth what he gained. Your father sends money once, a bank draft tucked in a letter with no greeting or signature. You recognize the handwriting, precise and cold. The sum would cover debts, but not sustain solvency. It's a reminder, not rescue. You cash it, of course. You consider thanking him, but the thought disappears between gaming tables and the bottom of an unpronounceable bottle. Occasionally, usually after too much brandy and too little company, you think about love. Not the performative kind, but something simpler. Waking beside someone who knows your name and stays by choice. The fantasy never lasts. You're not sure it ever belonged to you. It feels inherited like the furniture and receding hairline. You keep a bedside notebook meant for poetry or prayers or whatever profound thoughts you imagined having late at night. It stays mostly empty except for one line you barely remember writing. Borrowed charm, borrowed coat, borrowed time. Some mornings you stare at it wondering if it was joke or warning. And still you continue because continuing is what you were taught. You attend dinners, pay debts with money you don't have, seduce women whose names you'll forget by dawn. You drink. You smile. You nod at appropriate moments. You don't change. You perform. And one night, like countless others, you fall asleep in an unaffordable silk shirt beside a woman who doesn't know your real name, dreaming of a life you pretend is already yours. You wake one morning not significantly older, but profoundly more exhausted. Perfume lingers on the pillow beside you. The weather from last night's companion or last week's, you can't recall. The night was passable, but the illusion is fraying. The novelty of bachelorhood has dulled into something brittle and sour. You've sampled the wines, wagered the allowances, worn out the cravats. Yet invitations still arrive with sharper edges now. Not fewer, just more pointed. Behind every raised glass lurks the same velvet-toned question. When will he marry? It's never phrased as judgment, more like weather talk or inquiries about a mutual acquaintance's gout recovery. But it's there, hovering like dust motes in sunbeams. You laugh it off once, twice. By the third time, the weight settles on your chest. This isn't an option. It's a deadline. Youth, even the powdered and perfumed variety, expires, and yours is curdling. You marry strategically. No thunderbolts, no poetry, no moonlit elopements. Just letters, dozens of them, perfumed and passed through mothers, chaperones, solicitors. Meetings occur in drawing rooms heavy with forced smiles and flinching candlelight. You say pleasant things. She does too. You're both acutely aware of the silence beneath. The first time you touch her hand, it's during a quadrille. Her glove feels cold and perfectly fitted. Her expression doesn't change, the surest sign of proper upbringing. Your friends congratulate you with the hollow enthusiasm of soldiers watching a comrade get dragged off the battlefield. Some are already married. Some are delaying inevitability. All understand the rules. This isn't about affection. It's about arrangement. Her dowry is substantial. Her lineage sufficiently pure to appease the family archives. She's scandal-free, opinion-free, ambition-free. She'll reflect well on you. That's her role. That's yours. Courtship feels less like romance than hostage negotiations with fine china. You take tea with her mother. You endure her father's lectures on land and moral stability while counting how many weeks you'd survive if you disappeared. Exchanged letters say nothing profound, just that you're thinking of her, admired her gown, found her piano playing hauntingly flattering. You write these lies without meaning them. She replies with equal emptiness. The ink's always perfect, the handwriting elegant. You wonder if servants pin them. The first kiss happens in a garden. There are roses. There's moonlight. It feels like someone else's life. Her lips stay dry and still. Your hands remain at your sides. Neither breathes deeply lest it invite reality. You both know this must happen. You both pretend it might become something more. Later, you drink until forgetting how long her eyes stayed open during the act. The engagement announcement features a sketch vaguely resembling you if squinted at. Guests send notes. Your mother weeps decorously. Your father says good and nothing else. She acquires new dresses, new gloves, new responsibilities. You receive a banker's warning and a list of venues, not entirely humiliating given present circumstances. The wedding planning unfolds with meticulous, breathless detail. You attend none of it. No one expects you to. On the day itself, 3 men dress you in silence. Your collar's starched to military rigidity. Your waistcoat's too tight, but looks expensive. They give you a ring belonging to some forgotten ancestor, a symbol of commitment or recycling. You can't decide. At the church, candles glint like judgment. Pews overflow with people you barely know wearing expressions of quiet triumph. Your bride arrives precisely on time. She looks beautiful. She doesn't look happy. Neither do you. The ceremony stretches interminable. Vows are exchanged. Promises made. God gets invoked repeatedly as if he has nothing better to do than oversee this business merger. When instructed to kiss her, you do, briefly, politely. The crowd exhales in unison. Music swells. The carriage awaits. You step into it side by side. 2 mannequins draped in white and obligation, rolling toward a future already planned to death. The reception's lavish though unpaid for. There's uneaten food, untasted wine, unenjoyed music. Your toast begins with a joke and ends with a quotation. Polite applause follows. She smiles beside you. You don't speak again all evening. Guests circulate. Your mother looks pleased. Your father mildly surprised. Your aunt whispers, "You've done well." Whether financially or facially, you can't tell. Later, alone in theory though the room feels crowded with expectation, clothes come off at a pace best described as professional. You lie together wrapped in separate confusions. The sex isn't memorable, nor entirely unwelcome. It feels like ticking a box. You fall asleep first. You don't speak in the morning. She asks if you want tea. You say yes. The performance is complete. Marriage reveals itself not as a new beginning, but a new act. There are visits, suppers, obligations multiplied by 2. You walk arm in arm through gardens, drawing rooms, expectations. You laugh at prescribed moments. Make identical remarks about weather and fashion. Occasionally your hands touch in public, convincingly. In private, she reads. You drink. She embroiders. You reread the same 3 newspapers. Sometimes you speak, rarely simultaneously, always civilly. A routine emerges. Separate rooms. Shared servants. Notes left on trays. Conversations reduced to practicalities. Menus, seating charts, birthday reminders for people you don't care about. You avoid scandal. You avoid each other. People call you a fine couple, mistaking restraint for deep respect. You smile at the irony. She does too. There's strange peace in mutual disinterest. You don't love her. She doesn't love you. But you both love the absence of drama, the predictability, the way everything moves forward like a well-oiled mechanism. You imagine one day this civility might resemble affection, or at least tolerance. You hope so, because there's no going back. Not for either of you. In time, there are children. First one, then another. The eldest arrives in spring after a labor you don't witness and aren't expected to mention. They tell you it went well, meaning your wife survived and the midwife didn't faint. You visit briefly. She looks pale, proud, and slightly removed, like someone who's completed a demanding contract. You hold the swaddled, red-faced infant just long enough for propriety. He's already burdened with your grandfather's name. You nod, mutter something about strong lungs, then exit to where the butler waits to remind you the christening wine is 2 days overdue. You are now master of your estate and utterly at its mercy. The grounds stretch for miles in every direction. The house stands older than most ancestors buried beneath it. Windows creak in wind. walls groan in winter. There are rooms you've never entered and attics no one dares clean. The ledgers overflow with numbers that never quite balance. The steward assures everything's within reason, which means it isn't. You sign anyway. They trained you in Latin, not accounting. The servants run the household while you preside like an ornamental gargoyle. They know when to light fires, air linens, open shutters. They wake you with tea, dress you with quiet precision, restock your writing desk, and nudge the laudanum bottle closer when headaches return. You never told them where you keep it. They just knew. You hear the children sometimes, faint echoes down corridors. Their governess reports progress in tidy notes left by your breakfast plate. Your wife says they're healthy. You assume she's right. Your valet remains discreet to a fault. He speaks only when necessary and appears only when summoned, except when you need him without realizing, which is often. He shaves you like a man chiseling fragile marble. Mends gloves before you notice fraying. When you wake after bad nights, he doesn't ask questions. Just adjusts your collar to hide sweat stains and selects a cravat that draws eyes away from bloodshot ones. The butler controls the household rhythm. His footsteps mark meal times. His cough sets dinner's tempo. Maids move in his wake like shadows. The cook listens to his tone to gauge whether supper will be served with wine or apologies. You're certain he knows everything happening under this roof, often before it happens. You suspect he could blackmail everyone here using only his mental ledger. You smile at him. He bows. You both pretend this is mutual respect rather than mutual surveillance. Your wife maintains her own staff, a young watchful maid, a secretary who takes dictation at unsettling speeds, a cook who prepares artful meals that never quite fill plates. You dine together often enough to maintain appearances, rarely enough to keep peace. Conversations stay shallow by design. The silence between you grows polite but permanent. You exchange more notes than words. Some get folded into each other's breakfast trays. Others are forgotten. You're not sure she notices. You're not entirely sure you do either. Every hallway has ears. Every door has drafts. You learn to speak in euphemisms, not from delicacy, but survival. A touch of fatigue means 3 days Abed with a bottle. Disagreement about priorities means she stopped speaking to you altogether. Minor issue with the grounds means the roof leaks again and funds are lacking. No one here tells you anything directly. They simply move objects slightly and wait for you to notice. There's constant performance. Everything must appear serene, orderly, dignified. Guests are greeted at precise distances from the door. Linens are scented with lavender and changed before creases show. Silver gets polished twice as often as needed, not because anyone will inspect it, but because someone might. Meals are timed like military campaigns. Fires are laid so perfectly you sometimes forget they don't light themselves. You don't ask how many people maintain this illusion. The answer would discomfort you. Gossip travels faster than candle flames. Servants never speak of you in your presence. That would be unseemly. But you hear echoes in their careful pauses. How your valet avoids your eyes after bad nights. How the housekeeper glances at the laudanum bottle while dusting. You once overheard a stable boy call you the ghost ship. The nickname stung more than it should have. You laughed anyway. It was accurate. You host occasional dinner parties. The guest list is curated for status preservation and scandal avoidance. Your butler manages seating better than any diplomat. Your wife selects wines. You deliver toasts with enough charm to be admired and enough restraint to avoid suspicion. Afterwards, guests praise the roast and compliment the drapes. No one mentions the damp patch behind the library door. That's what rugs are for. Conversation stays shallow and musical. Laughter flickers like candlelight. You speak well. You drink carefully. You lie constantly. There are rare moments when the mask slips. A night you drink too much and forget to close the study door. A morning you wander halls barefoot searching for an unsent letter. A trembling hand passing a teacup to a footman. A silence too long between pleasantries. These are noted but never mentioned. The staff simply tightens routines, adds an extra candle to breakfast trays, adjusts tones. You appreciate it. You resent it. You begin disappearing into your own home, walking through rooms like a visitor, sitting in chairs that never feel like yours, speaking to your reflection more than your wife. The servants start resembling furniture, always present, always silent, always watching. You wonder if they discuss you at night. Not cruelly, just accurately. You hope they don't pity you. Mockery you could tolerate. Pity would be unbearable. Sometimes you remember being a boy in a house like this, watching your father from a distance, wondering what thoughts lived behind his glassy eyes and polished shoes. You thought mastery must feel powerful, that adulthood meant control. Now here you stand in his place. Same rooms, same phrases, same carefully measured expressions. You wonder if he ever wept behind the wine cellar door. You wonder if the butler ever bowed just slightly too slowly afterward. The truth is, you're not in charge. Not really. You're the central character in a play everyone else works tirelessly to maintain. They manage your schedule, your presentation, your moods. They know when to disappear and when to reappear with tea. You own the land, yes, but your valet knows where you keep the laudanum. He knows how often you reach for it. He knows you switch hands when drinking because the right one trembles more noticeably. And so the days pass in muffled ritual. You nod to your wife at breakfast. She nods back. You walk halls with hands clasped behind your back like you were taught. You sign unread letters. You approve budgets you don't understand. You thank the cook for meals you don't taste. You host guests you don't remember inviting. You wake tired and go to bed exhausted. Somewhere in between, you weep once, quietly, behind the wine cellar door, just for a moment when no one's looking. Then you nod to your butler. He bows. You both pretend he didn't see you crying. The social season arrives without invitation, like mildew or joint pain. You don't anticipate it. You endure it. Invitations multiply on the hall table, thick with wax seals and flourishes as if their paper weight could justify their contents. Some come from people you recall, some from strangers. All demand the same things: your presence, your pleasantness, and your passive consent to be examined like a freshly polished heirloom. You comply. You always do. That's what decades of training achieve. You dress, you attend, you speak, you regret. These 4 steps now form your evening liturgy, as sacred and exhausting as any religious rite. Your valet lays out your best coat, the one that disguises how your shoulders have begun to slope. You nod. He adjusts your cravat without being asked. You've stopped thanking him, not from cruelty, but exhaustion. You enter the carriage with your wife, both looking immaculate and detached. The ride passes silently save for gloved hands adjusting and throats being cleared. She carries a fan. You carry a flask. Neither asks what the other is thinking. The drawing rooms you enter are variations on a theme. Gilded mirrors, over-arranged furniture, desperate floral displays, and the low murmur of 24 people pretending not to scrutinize each other. You move through them like smoke. You deploy practiced phrases. How charming. Quite so. Indeed, I'd heard as much. You sip warm sherry. You accept uneaten sandwiches. You compliment gowns and inquire after health and suppress yawns behind embroidered handkerchiefs. This isn't conversation. It's choreography. Every event blurs together. Wednesday salons, Friday dances, club meetings where red-faced men debate trade tariffs they don't understand. A musical evening hosted by a woman who owns 3 harps but can't play any. A poetry reading where pauses speak louder than words. You nod at a man who once threatened to sue you over whist. He nods back. You're all terribly civilized. The food never matches its presentation. Cucumber sandwiches hover near staleness. Aspic quivers suspiciously. Someone serves July oysters, and everyone's too polite to protest. You chew carefully and drink faster. The wine's tepid, the punch questionable, the brandy just tolerable enough to be dangerous. You try not to calculate what these evenings cost, not in coin, but in dignity. The heat becomes unbearable. Powder cakes behind your ears before the second dance. Your wig itches like divine punishment. The air thickens with perfume, cologne, and whatever illness is currently fashionable to ignore. A gentleman faints mid-minuet. He's revived with whispers of scandal and water no one else dares drink. You once caught fever from one of these events. No one noticed until you missed 2 suppers consecutively. You perfect the half smile. the chin nod, the non-committal mm. You ask questions you don't want answered. How's your mother? How fares the countryside? Do you still ride? It doesn't matter if you remember who they are. The script stays the same. They reply. You reply. You both feel only relief when it ends. It's like fencing with dulled swords. No blood, no purpose, just exhaustion. Your wife excels at this. She smiles effortlessly. She deploys compliments that sting beneath their sugar. She converses with other women like a swan gliding across a pond. Elegant, silent, impossible to catch. You admire this in a way that feels closer to envy. She knows how to survive here. You only know how to remain upright. When your eyes meet across crowded rooms, there's no message in her gaze, just a flicker of shared weariness quickly tucked away. There are always new names to learn and old ones to avoid. The widow who asks uncomfortable questions, the cousin with the inheritance dispute, the man who insulted your waistcoat in '91 and was never forgiven, though the slight was too minor to recall without effort. You know whom to greet, whom to ignore, whom to congratulate regardless of occasion. Someone always has a new horse. Someone else always has a new mistress. You pretend to care. They pretend to believe you. The clubs prove no better. You sit in high-back chairs beside men discussing fox hunting and colonial prospects, as if either remains within reach. The cigars are stale. The card game's rigged. The politics whispered just loudly enough to avoid plausible deniability. You attend because absence would be noted. You sip brandy and nod at appropriate moments. Commerce, virtue, tradition. No one mentions debts or despair or the quiet toll this performance takes. That would be vulgar. There are moments when the room sways slightly too much. When your coat feels like armor. When the voice in your head, usually silent, usually sedated, asks what any of this is for. You ignore it. You were trained to. You weren't raised to seek meaning. You were raised to be admired. Not to ask questions, but to be the answer. A walking solution to social discomfort. A charming fixture. A gentleman in the most unfortunate sense of the word. You begin dreading laughter. Not because you dislike it, but because it always feels just beyond reach. The jokes are rehearsed. The joy manufactured. Someone compliments the pianist who's clearly terrible. Someone else agrees with the host's opinion on Italian opera despite contradicting himself last week. Everyone lies, not maliciously, just habitually. You realize slowly that no one here speaks honestly, including you. Sometimes, just to feel something, you say something slightly too blunt. You admit you haven't read the book. You confess the wine tastes like vinegar. You suggest the portrait over the mantel looks like it's trying to escape. People laugh. You're forgiven. You're charming, after all. That's what you're for. The joke lands. The conversation continues. The moment fades. You return home late, as always. Your wife doesn't ask how it went. You don't offer. You undress in silence. The valet folds your coat. You try remembering who you spoke to, who you impressed, who you may have accidentally offended. You fail. You recall the sandwiches were limp. The wine was warm. Your left shoe pinched all evening, and no one told you. You remember standing in a corner for 20 minutes, smiling like a statue while others laughed around you. You try not to notice your body failing. It's impolite to acknowledge, especially in company. But eventually, even the best tailored coat can't disguise that something's wrong, or rather, everything is. The pain begins quietly. A stiffness in the knees that morning walks don't ease. A burning behind the eyes no amount of shaded lamps relieve. A dull ache between your shoulder blades that lingers no matter how many hot cloths your valet applies. You blame age, though you're not particularly old, just tired in too many places for too many reasons. Something hurts. Everything hurts. It always has. You start limping slightly, then more noticeably. You sit with a wince unbecoming for a man your age, especially one who's never been a soldier. Your joints crack audibly during supper. A rash blooms behind your ear that no herbal salve can erase. Your teeth throb in cold weather. Your stomach turns at the smell of eggs. You wake in the night to your heart fluttering, halting, then stuttering back to life like a nervous colt. Your wife says nothing but begins sitting farther from you at meals. Eventually, someone suggests calling the physician. It might have been your valet or the butler while refilling your wine. You pretend you hadn't considered it. You had. You've just been delaying the inevitable. Georgian medicine is less science than interpretive dance, but you send for the doctor anyway. His reply comes suspiciously fast. Of course he can see you immediately. Dr. Vellum arrives next morning wearing a smile too bright for the weather and a coat so violently green it gives you a headache. His bag bulges with instruments you don't understand and herbs you don't trust. He smells of licorice and warm wool and something faintly metallic. He shakes your hand vigorously, slaps your shoulder like you've won a prize rather than summoned him for medical distress, compliments your rosy masculine complexion, then asks if you've been urinating more or less than usual. There is no neutral option, apparently. The examination is mostly theater. He prods your abdomen and declares your spleen temperamental. He taps your chest and pronounces your lungs vigorous but congested. Peering into your mouth, he clicks his tongue. You expect commentary on your teeth, but he just nods and scribbles in a notebook that scratches like judgment. Headaches, he asks. You admit to some. Melancholy thoughts. You lie and say no. He recommends horseback riding. You don't laugh. The treatments are exactly what you feared. Bloodletting, naturally, the cornerstone of any respectable Georgian catastrophe. He produces a lancet from velvet like it's a holy relic, then cuts a neat line in your arm, watching the blood flow like a vintner admiring his finest barrel. You grow dizzy within minutes. He looks delighted. The bad humors are retreating, as if you've routed them with cannon fire. You attempt to smile. It doesn't land. Next comes mercury. Not directly. Dr. Vellum would never be so crude, but hidden in a syrup poured into a silver spoon and fed to you like a child. It tastes of coins and cloves and something deeply unholy. You ask what it's meant to treat. Balance, he says, which could mean anything. Your bowels protest within the hour. He calls this a good sign. You begin suspecting he's never seen a bad one. Herbs are applied with abandon. Poultices wrap your joints. Lavender soothes your nerves. Chamomile calms your liver. Willow bark eases your teeth. None help. When you say so, he suggests brandy. You inform him you've been using that treatment extensively. He nods like he'd suspected as much and recommends continuing, but with better brandy. You make a note to try this right after vomiting up his last tonic. The worst is the gout treatment. It involves wrapping your foot in boiled cabbage leaves while whispering affirmations about blood purity. When that fails, as it always does, he soaks it in vinegar and crushed sage. The sensation resembles cooking your own extremities. He assures you this is normal. You assure him you despise him. He laughs. You don't. The topic of venereal disease arises casually, as if discussing the common cold. He doesn't ask directly, just mentions how surprisingly prevalent such afflictions have become among men of leisure. You stare without blinking. He nods sympathetically and prescribes dandelion root, sulfur powder, and abstinence. You take the first two. The third goes ignored. Nothing works, not truly. The pain persists. The fatigue deepens. Your skin grows pallid beneath the powder. Your eyes sink into their sockets. Still you attend dinners. Still you nod at the steward. Still you wear lace cuffs and sip wine like nothing's wrong. Dr. Vellum keeps visiting, each time more cheerful, as if your decline is merely testing his optimism. He claps your back, insists you're improving. You feel like you're being embalmed by the inch. You consider a second opinion, but the nearest alternative prescribes leeches and astrological patterns. You stick with Dr. Vellum. At least his shoes are clean. You begin timing his visits by how long it takes him to suggest walks in fresh air. He always does. Never explains what it's meant to cure. You suspect it's just to get you out of the house and into someone else's problem. You try maintaining routines. You write letters with trembling hands. You oversee estate matters from a chair that now requires 2 cushions. You attend obligations when possible, smiling tightly, leaning heavily on your cane. The whispers have started, you think, soft and indirect, like drafts under doors. He's pale, thinner than last year. Not quite right. You respond by quoting Horace and adjusting your cravat. Your heart skips again. You pretend not to notice. Sometimes alone, you remove your shirt and study yourself in the mirror. Your skin's mottled. Your ribs protrude more than remembered. A yellowish tinge circles your eyes that no powder quite hides. You breathe slowly, as if afraid to disturb your own organs. You press a hand to your chest and feel the irregular flutter. You don't tell the doctor. He'd only prescribe more wine. The laudanum moves permanently to your nightstand, no longer hidden in drawers. You measure it carefully until you stop measuring. You take it not for sleep, but distance. The world softens when blurred. The pain dulls. The thoughts quiet. You stop dreaming. You consider this mercy. Dr. Vellum visits again with a new syrup, dark purple, promising clarity of mood. It tastes like ashes. You ask what it is. Something from the colonies, he shrugs. Quite modern. You don't ask which colony or what year. You no longer care. He checks your skipping pulse and calls it melancholy of the blood. You stare until he looks away. That night you lie still, sweating into your lace pillow, listening to your heart stutter like a nervous violinist. The doctor says it's just melancholy. The doctor's an idiot. You write letters. You balance books. You pray your creditors die before you do. This, more than anything, is what adulthood has become, a never-ending correspondence of deferments, polite inquiries, evasive pleasantries, and numbers that refuse to align as they should. You sit in your study with a blanket draped over your knees, a quill trembling faintly between ink-stained fingers. The inkpot's half dry. The paper smells faintly of mildew. Your back aches from the chair's angle. Your foot's gone numb again. You envy it. Letters arrive from acquaintances, or perhaps just people being polite, requesting your presence at suppers, salons, increasingly desperate charity functions. You respond to most with vague regrets and enthusiastic lies. How I long to attend. A shame I'm indisposed. Do pass along my warmest congratulations. You write these without looking, the phrases now muscle memory like breathing or apologizing for things that aren't your fault. Then come the bank letters, thicker now, bearing names you recognize from your ledger's margins. You don't open them immediately. Instead, you place them in a neat stack beside the inkstand, pretending proximity counts as responsibility. When you finally slit one open with your ivory-handled knife, the contents are exactly as feared. More reminders, more balances due, more phrases like final notice that never seem quite final. You consider replying, then realize you've written this same apology 3 times this month. Back into the stack it goes. The ledgers are worse. They stare up with cold numerical indifference that makes the doctor seem compassionate. The numbers don't lie, but they're excellent at mockery. The household budget bleeds red and black across pages. Tenant rents arrive late if at all. Stable expenses exceed last season's. The cellar needs restocking. The roof leaks again. The wine account is embarrassingly detailed, but you can't bring yourself to curb it. You tell yourself it's medicinal. You tell yourself many things. The wine stains don't help. Several pages are ruined by your shaking hand and unsteady glass. Some you can blot. Others are beyond saving. Your valet now places a cloth under your elbow when you write. He doesn't comment on the tremors or the bottles or the sighs that have become part of your breathing. In his own way, he's a professional liar too. Writing becomes its own deception. Every phrase is a tightrope between desperation and decorum. You can't say I am ruined, so you write the quarter has been unexpectedly tight. You can't admit I have nothing left, so it's my affairs require temporary adjustment. You can't beg outright, but you can suggest that a loan would be neither misplaced, nor unrewarded, nor unspoken of. The recipients know exactly what you mean. They're experts in this dance. No one is honest with ink. Some letters never get sent. You write them in the quietest hours when the house sleeps and your head is loudest. Letters to people long dead. To the woman you almost married before your name became a cautionary tale. To no one in particular, just to write something that doesn't end in an apology. These get folded, sealed, and placed in the drawer beside your bed. You never reread them. The quill grows lighter in your grip as hours pass. Not because the work gets easier, but because your fingers are slowly numbing. Your thumb cramps. Your wrist clicks. You switch hands and try again. Wax seals pile up on the blotter, each stamped with your family crest, so noble, so ancient, so irrelevant. You wonder if the wax costs more than the letters are worth. You wonder if your seal still impresses anyone. You wonder if it ever did. There's always more to write. Notices to tenants. Apologies to tailors. Inquiries to suppliers. Notes to cousins who pretend not to recognize your name when it appears beside the word arrears. You maintain a tone of good humor. You sign off with warmest regards and in continued friendship even when you suspect the recipient would rather see your name in the obituaries. You once tried ending a letter with just sincerely. It felt like a confession. Even folding becomes ritualistic. Precise creases, sealing wax warmed over candle stubs, the careful stamp timed just before the wax hardens. You perform each motion as if it might summon better news from the ink. It never does. Still you write. Still you fold. Still you seal. Still you wait for replies that arrive late or not at all, or come back with nothing but vague promises of review or consideration. You pin them to your desk corner and tell yourself it's not the worst thing you've read today. Your steward visits weekly with questions he already knows the answers to. Can we delay paying the miller? Can we sell another section of orchard? Can we dismiss the groundsman without causing talk? You nod. You nod again. You sign. He thanks you with the practiced relief of a man surviving someone else's storm. You offer him brandy. He declines. He always declines. You sometimes imagine disappearing, not permanently, just long enough to reset the balances. A trip abroad, a health retreat, something vague like the letters you send. You picture yourself in Italy drinking better wine and forgetting the language of debt. But the fantasy has expenses. The reality is your passport hasn't been touched in a decade, and your travel trunk contains only mold. You close one ledger. You open another. The numbers never quite add up. The estate yields less each year. The bills grow larger. Your name no longer inspires trust. You're seen not as a gentleman of means, but as a man clinging to the last threads of a reputation embroidered on someone else's success. And yet the letters continue because silence would be worse. Silence would be admission. Silence would be surrender. You finish the latest to your tailor with your usual closing. I thank you for your continued patience. The ink blots as your hand shakes. You stare at the words a long time before sealing. You're not sure he'll believe it. You're not sure you do. He stitched 3 coats without payment. You owe him 6 months' wages. One day you gather your family for a portrait. You pretend. The suggestion surfaces during a supper where everyone's too exhausted to object. It's been years since the last proper likeness. You tell yourself it's tradition, that it will secure your legacy, that it's the least you can do for posterity. But the truth is simpler. You're desperate to freeze a version of your life that at least looks intact, even if it never truly was. The painter arrives 3 weeks later with wagons of oils and compliments. He's neither young nor old, with a face that's seen too many dining rooms and not enough daylight. He wears clothes suggesting more time with canvases than people. A fine estate, he says. A noble face, he claims. You nod and show him the parlor. Heavy curtains drawn for flattering afternoon light. He approves, of course. He always would. Your wife takes charge. She selects everyone's clothes with military precision. Your eldest wears a jacket he's outgrown, shoulders straining, collar wilting. Your middle child gets ordered not to fidget. Your youngest is bribed with sweets. You're squeezed into your best coat, the one with silver buttons that catch light just enough to suggest solvency. It no longer fits properly. Nobody mentions this. The sitting lasts eternally. Children grow restless before the first sketch is done. Your wife remains perfectly still, gaze fixed slightly above the painter's head, as if envisioning something more tolerable. You sit beside her with one hand on her wrist, not from affection, but because it photographs better than nothing. Nobody speaks unless prompted. When the painter makes conversation, your children look to their mother for permission to respond. She gives none. You attempt to smile, not too broad. A gentleman's expression must be neutral, assured, vaguely thoughtful. You aim for contemplative and land somewhere near mildly unwell. The painter seems pleased. Yes, hold that, he says. You do. Your arm begins cramping. Your youngest coughs. Your eldest stares out the window, plotting escape. The dog, added for warmth, falls asleep snoring. You're told not to move. You want to scream. Between sessions, The painter adjusts lighting and flatters your wife's complexion. Your eldest will command rooms someday, he declares. Your daughter has remarkable stillness, he observes, sounding more like a taxidermy appraisal than compliment. You nod and offer tea he accepts like a sacrament. You watch him work, wondering how many crumbling families he's documented this way. Still lives of domestic decay, smiling for audiences that don't exist. The children despise every moment. They complain of heat, of boredom, of stiff collars and aching feet. You remind them this is important. This is how families are remembered. They don't understand. They ask how much longer. You say it's nearly done. It isn't. You're all waiting for the painter to find something noble in your collective posture. You don't say this aloud. You're too busy keeping your jaw from clenching. You begin wondering what this portrait will truly show. Not your real expressions. Not the awkwardness between your children or the quiet distance in your wife's gaze. Not the bruise on your shin from tripping over a chair or the gout swelling beneath your left stocking. It will show symmetry, composition, an illusion of harmony. Something future generations can point to and say, see, they looked happy. That, you realize, is the point. Not to record truth, but replace it. You're not immortalizing a moment. You're manufacturing one. The final sitting's shorter. The painter makes quick adjustments, murmurs about capturing essence, then packs his brushes with professional care. You offer more tea out of habit. He declines. Your wife nods approval. The children flee. The dog vanishes under the settee. You stretch and feel something pop in your knee. The painter shakes your hand, saying it's been a pleasure. You say likewise, knowing neither means it. He leaves. The house exhales. Your wife disappears without comment. You remove your coat, your waistcoat, your shoes, and sit in your study in silence, stripped of performance, but not its aftertaste. You pour a drink you don't want, just to hold something heavier than regret. The painting arrives a month later, large, imposing. The colors are rich. The light is flattering. You look strong and composed. Your wife looks serene. Your children look obedient. The dog's still asleep. By all technical measures, it's a triumph. Guests compliment it. Servants dust it. Your steward nods approvingly. You stare at it longer than necessary, trying to remember if any of it felt real. It didn't. You hang it in the dining room where it can whisper lies to anyone who glances its way. This is what family looks like. This is success. This is permanence. You smile at it during meals. It never smiles back. Later, walking past with your youngest, she stops and stares up at the painted version of you, tall and composed, one hand resting on a chair you don't even own. She tilts her head, squints, then turns to you frowning. Who's that? You smile politely. Eventually, the whispers begin. You hear them at the edges of drawing rooms, murmuring through corridors, tucked between compliments. Never spoken directly to you. That would require honesty. They emerge as questions too quiet to answer. Is he quite well? I heard the estate's not what it was. Such a shame. He always dressed so nicely. They never say your name. They never need to. At first, it's small things. A glance that lingers too long before sliding away. A conversation that stops when you enter. A cousin who suddenly forgets to invite you to the hunt. She's never forgotten before. You tell yourself people are busy, that society ebbs and flows, that you've been in favor before and will be again. But the unease remains, tugging at your sleeve like a persistent child. Then come the larger signs. Fewer guests at your dinners. Fewer replies to your letters. The banker who once greeted you warmly now asks sharper questions. A man you advised on investments avoids eye contact. Your wife receives fewer notes from the hostess she called friend. Compliments on the portrait grow rare, as if people are remembering what you actually look like. You keep smiling. You keep hosting. But the veneer is cracking, and everyone smells the varnish. You step more carefully into rooms. You speak more gently, more vaguely. You avoid opinions. You quote poets with extra gravitas. You dress with even greater care, darker coats, cleaner lines, anything suggesting quiet authority. Your valet notices. He adjusts your collars higher, brushes lint off your shoulders with near paternal care. He doesn't speak of the change. Neither do you. But the performance exhausts you. Every outing feels like an audition. Every dinner like a tribunal. You begin doubting your own voice mid-sentence, watching others for cues on when to laugh, when to toast, how much wine is acceptable before it becomes suspicious. You no longer know if you're being gracious or just desperate. The difference, you suspect, is academic. Reputation isn't something you build. It's something you rent. You spent decades earning yours through politeness, presentation, proximity to power. It took all your restraint, all your discipline, all your carefully worded letters and perfectly buttoned coats. And it takes one cough, one rumor, one misplaced glance to lose it. There's never one scandal. No affairs. No public collapse. Nothing you can point to and say, there, that's what did it. But you feel it. The sensation of being watched more closely but spoken to less. Your name drops further down guest lists. People say, ah, yes, instead of course, when reminded who you are. You hear someone saw you leaving the physician's at odd hours. You hear your wife visits her cousin in Bath more often. You hear your tailors stopped extending credit. The stories don't need to be true. They just need to circulate. By the time they reach you, they've done their work. You could refute them, but that would mean they matter. So you say nothing and let them grow. Your children, still young enough for obliviousness, ask why certain people no longer call. You tell them the season's quiet. You tell them everyone's traveling. You tell them the same lies you tell yourself. Your eldest asks if the family crest still means anything. You say it always will. He nods uncertainly. You hope he never notices how many letters you no longer receive. You begin shrinking your world. You stay home more. You invent headaches. You decline invitations with such convincing regret that people stop asking. You sit in your study rereading old correspondence like sacred texts, hunting for names you've not seen in years. You wonder which of them started it, or if they all did slowly together. There's no confrontation, no formal exile, just a gradual, silent recategorization. You're no longer a man of interest. You're a man of quiet concern. Still respected technically, but less relied upon. Still greeted formally, but less sought out. You've become a fixture like the family silver, polished, admired, but rarely used and never trusted too near the table's edge. At a recent gathering, you try reasserting yourself. You tell a story from your youth that usually draws laughter. This time, it lands poorly. A pause follows your punchline. Someone coughs. Someone changes the subject. You laugh along as if you hadn't noticed. But you had. Of course you had. You pass a mirror later and barely recognize yourself. The coat still fits, but your shoulders slump. Your eyes look too tired for their sockets. You touch your hairline and find it thinner than remembered. You smile experimentally. It looks forced. You try again. Worse. You stop. The invitations still come occasionally. Fewer. Later. Less sincere. You suspect you're being invited to balance numbers or soften someone else's scandal. You attend anyway. You sit politely. You smile on cue. You sip your wine and laugh when expected. And when nobody's looking, you allow yourself a moment of silence that feels almost like grief. Your wife doesn't speak of it. She's too well trained for that. But you catch her watching you sometimes, as if trying to determine whether the rumors are true or if they matter anymore. You don't ask. You wouldn't want to know the answer. One evening at a supper hosted by a man whose fortune you once saved with a timely loan, you arrive on time. Perfectly dressed, your wife beside you. Every detail arranged to project dignity. You're greeted with polite smiles and light conversation, but the seating's wrong. The introductions are brief. You're addressed once when someone mistakes you for another. You correct them. They nod vaguely. After the meal, you circulate slowly, pausing at groups, saying little. Your voice is hoarse. Your limbs ache. You excuse yourself early, citing fatigue. Nobody insists you stay. On the way out, you see someone you've known for years, someone who once toasted your name with genuine admiration. You bow. They nod like they don't recognize you. Maybe they don't. The years slip by. You're in your 50s now. Everything hurts. Nothing surprises you. You no longer pretend the aches are temporary. They've settled into your bones like tenants who've stopped paying rent but can't be evicted. The pain is quieter now, familiar in its dullness. Your knees crack in the morning. Your shoulders catch when you turn too quickly. The stiffness in your fingers no longer fades by midday. You eat less. You sleep less. Your body has begun closing down politely but firmly, like a well-run estate with nothing left to host. The doctor still visits. He still smiles. He still carries his satchel of nonsense. He still prescribes fresh air and gentle movement, as if either will fix the rot beneath your ribs. You nod because arguing requires energy, and you're more careful with that than money these days. He suggests a new tonic. You take it. It tastes like despair and elderflower. He says you'll feel better by next week. You don't ask what he means by better. You've stopped attending most dinners. You say the light bothers your eyes. The crowd makes your chest tighten. The sound of cutlery on porcelain gives you headaches. None of it's false, but none of it's the real reason either. The truth is simpler. You don't see the point anymore. You're tired of pretending your presence matters, of watching conversations twist around you like vines that never quite touch. People still greet you briefly, kindly, but they don't linger. They don't ask. You're no longer someone to impress. You're someone to nod at on the way to someone more important. Your wife maintains appearances as always. She dresses impeccably, hosts modestly, attends sparingly. She visits you in your sitting room once daily, like someone checking on a painting they're unsure how to restore. You speak of safe things, weather, correspondence, the housekeeper's new hire. You ask after the children, though they write to her more than to you. She responds dutifully. There's no warmth, but no anger either. Just mutual understanding that the emotional ledger closed long ago. The children have grown. They visit less. Your eldest has children of his own now and a sense of duty that doesn't extend to proximity. Your second writes letters full of polite distance. Your youngest, the one who asked who you were, signs her name with just an initial now. You keep their letters in a drawer beside your bed. You reread them more than you'd admit. Not for the words, but the handwriting. Proof someone remembers to include you, if only by obligation. You spend most days in the library, not reading, but watching light move across the carpet. The same books you once pretended to enjoy now feel too heavy. The dust on the shelves no longer bothers you. Sometimes you take one down just to remember what your hands could once do. Your grip is weaker now. The pages tremble as you turn them. You get halfway through a paragraph and forget why you started. You set the book down. It stays there for days. Meals are small and quiet. You chew slowly, carefully, avoiding the teeth that ache and the ones already gone. The cook adjusts textures without comment. Your valet now buttons your shirts and fastens your cuffs without waiting to be asked. You don't thank him. He doesn't need it. The rhythm is familiar, and that's all either of you requires. You've stopped checking the ledgers. The steward handles them now. He brings updates monthly, standing stiffly in the doorway, reading from a list you never request. You nod. Sometimes you sign. Sometimes you don't. It makes no difference. The estate continues functioning the way old things do, imperfectly, without urgency, increasingly out of step with the world around it. Mornings are hardest. You wake not because you're rested, but because sleep no longer holds you. The sheets are damp with sweat, or perhaps memory. Your hands are stiff. Your back is sore. The taste of old blood sits behind your teeth. You rise slowly, cautiously, like a man disarming his own body. You dress with assistance. You eat in silence. You walk the halls not for exercise, but to remind yourself you still can. Sometimes by the window, you catch sight of your reflection. It startles you, not because it's unfamiliar, but because it's too familiar. You look exactly as you feel, threadbare, faded, almost transparent. Your cravats always slightly askew now. Your cuffs are never quite clean. There's a smudge near your left I know washing removes. You wonder if it's a shadow or a warning. Either way, you stop looking. You write less. The ink blots more easily. The quill trembles in your grip. The letters come less frequently. Replies even less so. You start drafts and finish none. Eventually, you stop pretending. The paper stays blank. The desk remains undisturbed. The correspondence you once clung to now feels like a joke told in longhand. You don't laugh. Your conversations with staff grow shorter. Some have been with you decades. Some you don't recognize. You nod. They nod. You thank them when you remember. They bow when they remember. There's no cruelty between you, but no warmth either. Just habit wearing a uniform. You don't dream often anymore. When you do, they're muted, not frightening, not joyful, just beige. You walk through familiar rooms without purpose. You hear voices you recognize but can't answer. Sometimes you sit in a chair watching your children play outside, though they're the same age they were 20 years ago. You wake with the weight of those dreams pressing your chest, as if something you forgot to grieve is finally arriving. Your wife doesn't ask how you sleep. You don't ask how she feels. The last time you touched her hand was on a stairwell by accident. It was cold and very still. She apologized. You said nothing. There was nothing to say. You don't fear death. Not really. You fear dying without clarity, without closure, without ever having understood what any of this was for. You try to reflect, but the moments blur. The triumphs feel small. The failures feel distant. You wonder if you missed something important, some quiet truth hidden in years of polite noise. You wonder if the painting will outlive the version of you it pretends to know. One evening you sit by the fire, watching coals dim, hands folded in your lap. You feel the pain in your chest again, not sharp, not urgent, just familiar. A dull tap on a door you've long stopped answering. You close your eyes and breathe carefully, not deeply, just enough to stay upright, just enough to stay here. You wonder what they'll say after you're gone, not in marble or sermons or dedications beneath your family crest, just in drawing rooms, at dinner tables, in the low hum of gossip that always circles back to the dead because they can't defend themselves. Will they say you were respectable? That you dressed well, nodded at the right moments, died with a clean collar? Will they remember the parties, the portraits, the way you always had a dry comment when rooms grew too warm? Will they forget that you once wept into your shirt sleeves before a dinner party, wiped your face with rose water, told the footman to bring more wine? You suspect you won't be remembered at all. Not the real you. Just a silhouette, powdered wig, tight smile, ledger always slightly too red. Perhaps your grandson will point to your portrait and say you were important. Perhaps your debts will be folded neatly into his. Perhaps your name will be engraved on a plaque no one reads, in a church no one attends, beneath a hymn no one sings. And maybe that's for the best. You've spent your entire life performing, applauded but not known, present but not quite alive. You inherited a house, a name, a burden, and you carried it all the way here, polished and exhausted. When the end comes, and it will, there won't be a scandal or a tragedy, just a quiet reshuffling. A new name on the accounts, a new man in the dining chair, someone younger, someone who still believes the performance matters. And you? You'll be a line in the family Bible, a signature in a ledger, a face in a painting someone eventually removes to make space for better light. You were never meant to be eternal, just well-behaved.